Have you ever reached a point where you weren't necessarily physically tired, but rather emotionally exhausted? Not because of one major crisis or one terrible event, but you're just exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that makes simple decisions feel harder than they should. The kind that leaves you feeling disconnected from yourself, your motivation wanes, your creativity feels lacking, and sometimes even the people around you. I think many of us have experienced seasons like this. And if you're anything like me, you've probably tried to push through it um, at least once or twice in your life. Emotional exhaustion doesn't always have to look dramatic. It oftentimes isn't. One of the reasons emotional exhaustion can be difficult to recognize is because it doesn't always show up the way that we expect. Most people imagine burnout as some dramatic breakdown, but often it arrives much more quickly. We become less patient, we become more irritable and distracted and emotionally numb. We stop feeling excited about the things that once brought us joy. We find ourselves constantly needing distractions, yet never really feeling fully rested. And because those changes often happen gradually, we don't recognize them for what they are. I sometimes think that we underestimate just how much information, responsibility, and emotional input we process every single day. That could look like, what we do with work, our family, news. Don't even get me started on social media. Financial concerns, that's a big one. Health concerns, that's huge. Relationships, expectations that we place on others, and the expectations that we feel we're getting from everybody else. Even when we're not consciously thinking about those things, they're often running quietly in the background. And after a while, carrying all of that mental and emotional weight can become exhausting. Um, Productivity has become tied to our self-worth. One pattern I've noticed within myself and in many others is the belief that the rest has to be earned. That if we're not being productive, we're we should be doing something. Otherwise, we're lazy. We need to be fixing something and improving something. We have to be accomplishing something at all times. And when we finally slow down, we feel guilty. But the truth is, constantly pushing ourselves doesn't always create more clarity. And sometimes it creates more exhaustion. It's emotional exhaustion. This is also one of the reasons that I believe emotional exhaustion can make it difficult to hear our intuition clearly. Not because intuition disappears, it doesn't go away, but because it becomes harder to hear beneath all that noise. Stress becomes louder, fear becomes louder, overthinking becomes louder. And when we're running on empty, it's often difficult to tell the difference between genuine inner knowing and emotional overwhelm. One of the things that I appreciate about numerology is that it naturally encourages reflection, not just on where we're struggling, but on where we may be overextending ourselves. What patterns are we repeating? What season of life we're moving through? Sometimes the greatest value isn't even the information itself. Sometimes it's just the pause, that silent pause, the opportunity to slow down long enough to check in with ourselves honestly. Perhaps Emotional exhaustion has become so common because many of us have become accustomed to carrying more than we were ever meant to carry alone. And after a while, that weight begins to affect everything. It affects our relationships. It affects our decision making. It definitely affects our intuition and our well-being. Maybe the answer isn't always pushing harder, but sometimes the answer is actually creating enough space to hear ourselves again, not by doing more, but allowing ourselves to pause long enough to recognize what we truly need. If this conversation resonates with you, my name is Priscilla Daphney. I share reflective guidance around intuition, self-awareness, numerology, emotional healing, and the patterns that shape our lives here on this channel. And I also offer privately prepared numerology reports and intuitive services designed to be experienced in your own pace and on your own time. And you can learn more at priscilladaphne.com. Thank you so much for spending this time with me, and I hope I'll see you here on the next video.